Well, good evening, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Aisha and Will on behalf of the Capital Region. Thank you for taking our invite, and your staff was really cordial. It was nice working with them. So, Leadership Maryland, this is kind of like a second to last class, and we've gone throughout the region, looked at different policing talks, and what we wanted to do was really kind of get a flavor from Montgomery County and Prince George's County. But we're going to start a little light, okay? So I'm originally from Sierra Leone, West Africa, and I know there's some culture with your parents and stuff. You guys are, but you've been in the area you grew up here and you serve in the community. So tell us who you are and how that culture's impacted you. Aisha, would you like to start?
Sure. So I'm Aisha Braveboy. So of course my last name sounds a little different than most people. You know, I'm probably the first Braveboy you've met. But I can tell you that my father is from Grenada. However, we have done a little bit of family history, and there are brave boys and brave boys who are Native Americans in North Carolina, South Carolina. So what we believe is that after the War of Independence, those who were enslaved, who fought on the side of the British, left, and the British went and colonized the Caribbean islands. And so part of my family is in the Caribbean, and the other part we believe just stayed in North Carolina, South Carolina, in that area. So if you meet a Bray, B-R-A-Y-B-O-Y, or B-R-A-E-B-O-Y, they're likely related to me in some way.
So how has that impacted who you are today?
Well, you know, being first generation, I saw the really struggles and triumph of my family, some of who are still in Grenada or Trinidad or other parts of the Caribbean. I understand, the challenges they face in their economy, but the fact is they still make it. All of my cousins have gone on to college and beyond, and some have decided to come here to America, and others to England and other parts of the world. And I think what I understand and know is that really education is that ticket to whatever you want to do. And so my father has always impressed upon me the importance of obtaining an education, not just to get a job and to make money, but really it's about freedom. It's about freedom and choices and being able to do and be and live wherever you want. And so that has really always stuck with me and my sister and my family.
And so one thing that reminds me of, they can take anything away from you, but they can't take your education away from you, right?
Yes.
That was kind of what my parents were preaching too. And I work at DC Water, and so your dad retired from DC Water. He was a bedrock. He was managing the sewer district. So yes, he was a man of integrity.
He was Mr. Sewer for DC Water. No, but he loved his job. And what I love about meeting people who worked with him is that they always loved my father. He was definitely in senior management, but he talked and joked with everyone, and he was a good leader for everyone. So it's so great to meet someone who worked with him.
All right, thank you. So Will, I was looking, doing some homework before I came for this event, and I saw when you actually became councilman, you wore an abada, which is an African outfit of Nigerian intent. Talk a little bit about your parents and the rich culture that you have.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, and good to be with my sister in all ways, Aisha Braveboy, who's doing a great job. And I did learn something I didn't know today about you. I wore an agbada, which is, we should have a picture of it. It's really beautiful. It's royal blue. I stood out. We were at the Strathmore and on Rockville Pike, and everyone else had a suit on. And I wore it because my dad had just passed away, and my dad's Nigerian. He was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and left right on the tail end of a civil war in that country, the Biafran Civil War. And like many immigrants before him, came to America seeking opportunity for himself, fleeing violence, and found it somehow in a small little town in Kansas called Hayes, where my mom was from. So you know someone from Hayes? We have someone from Hayes in the audience. Let it be noted. And Hayes is a couple, thousands of people. It's not a huge town. The biggest thing there is the university. Fort Hays State University is an old Civil War town, and that's where my mother, who had grown up there, her dad was a street sweeper. She's a little 5-foot white woman from that rural town. They got together and moved east, and I was born and raised in Silver Spring. They moved here for economic opportunity. So I like to say I have both sides of the American story: internal displacement and seeking acceptance of interracial relationship, and then my dad's coming, which is very traditional, fleeing violence and seeking opportunity, like all immigrants have come here, unless you're indigenous peoples, obviously, who had land taken from them. And so it's really, I wore that agbada to represent my family history, but also, a third of our residents are foreign-born in Montgomery County. And that's true of a lot of parts of Maryland. And if you take their children, 45% are either first or second generation immigrants, almost half of our residents. And so I can't tell you, I still hear from today, that was 3 years ago, from Chinese Americans and folks from the Caribbean and Central and South America, and say, thank you for doing that, because we see ourselves that that's possible, that we can be fully who we are, represent our culture, but also be fully American. So I am in every sense a true Nigerian American.
Well, thank you. And so one thing you'll note, they're extremely eloquent. Both of them are lawyers, right? You went to Howard University, you went to Catholic.
Sorry.
And so
Just across the reservoir. I hung out at Howard, though.
So what are perceptions and realities of Prince George's County in your case, and then Montgomery County, Will, from your perspective?
I think the perceptions of Prince George's County really depend on your experiences, if you've ever been to Prince George's. And so we are, I think, actually the wealthiest, probably most highly educated majority black county, or larger, let's say, black county in the country.
We are the wealthiest African American county in the country.
Well, so yes. But what I'm saying is that, there are other smaller geographic areas that may technically be, but my point is, that's what we're looked at, but we do have our challenges. So some of people who are coming here from other parts of the country, they think like Prince George's County is like the Mecca. They're like, wow, they're black people doing stuff. They've got these big houses. I'm really surprised when people who are coming, especially from the South, when they come here, they are just completely amazed by the wealth. But there are lots of different sides and parts to Prince George's County. We are a very dynamic county in that we have people who are doing very, very well, and we have people who are struggling. And in those areas that are struggling, the perceptions are maybe different than in parts of the county that's not struggling. So I would say that people, their perception is based on where they visited our county, because they could visit, let's say, Mitchellville or Bowie, and they could think, wow, this county's on the move. And then they could visit other areas inside the Beltway on the border of D.C. where we have not done enough development and investment. And they may say, wow, there's a lot of crime here, or there's a lot of, despair. But again, it's all about where you go. And that's one of the things about Prince George's County that people don't realize, is that we have huge disparities in wealth and opportunity and in education within our borders.
Thank you, Aisha.
Yeah, and it's interesting, as I was listening to Aisha talk, it's very similar. Maryland is a story of disparities, right? We have the most millionaires per capita of any state in the nation. And Montgomery County has the most millionaires per capita of any county in the state. And so we're traditionally seen as a very wealthy county, and we are, but with 500 square miles, 1.1 million people, there's a lot of stories in Montgomery County. And I grew up in Langley Park on one of these border areas where Prince George's meets Montgomery, where it's highly immigrant, it's very low income. There are challenges and disparities there. Just a stone's throw away from downtown Silver Spring, which has developed over my lifetime. And So we have some of the wealthiest. You know, I'm an at-large member. I represent Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team, who has a 30,000 square foot home in Potomac, and I also represent, the person in Briggs Cheney that is living in a dilapidated apartment, just trying to scrape by, and we have everything in between. And we are majority people of color. I think a lot of times people hear Montgomery County and they think that's a wealthy white county. But 52% of our residents are people of color between Black, Latino, and Asian. 20% Black, 20% Latino, and about 12% Asian, and Asian of all types, Southern, Central. And while I'm only the second African American elected countywide ever, Ike Leggett, our longtime county executive who taught at Howard,
he was my professor.
Your professor at Howard was the first. I often get fun. It's funny, like when I tell people, where do you represent? They're like, oh, are you from Prince George's County? I always so the perceptions are tied to each other, and I think that's part of our shared work. Is how do we make sure that everyone has opportunity in our state, and realizing that our challenges and our opportunities don't stop at a county line.
Thank you. So the question I'm going to ask is, in essence, is the work that you do, but I'm going to set it up from a perspective of how has the work been impacted based on George Floyd's death?
Well, a lot of my work has been based on the death of George Floyd and really the movement of the country. Because as the top law enforcement officer, my job is to ensure that we run a fair justice system. And it's not because of what I think is fair, it's really what the people think is fair. And so it's really important that I understand that people were affected by the death of George Floyd. And even though I believe that I was moving in the direction of creating a fair justice system, I had to dig deeper and say, are we doing enough? And so during the pandemic, which coincided with this total movement in criminal justice and social justice reform, I met with every single one of my units. And I said, what can we do differently? What can we do better? Are we doing everything that we can to ensure, yes, safety, because that's our mission and our purpose, but also to ensure that we are administering a justice system that people can be proud of. And we actually ended up changing a few things that we were doing in the office. We changed things we did around our no-knock search warrants. We looked at, expanding our diversion and our second chance programs. I was the first state's attorney to say, we're going to give juvenile lifers a second chance. But I said we need to ramp up the numbers that are going through our system so that we can provide more people an opportunity to be outside of the walls, or get from behind the walls as quickly as possible. What can we do to work with our court system to help those individuals obtain their freedom a little sooner? So there was a fierce urgency of now, that we needed to make changes now and not wait, and not do a test group and see how that works. No, there's certain changes that we knew needed to take place right now. We also decided that we needed to work with our police department. We have done nearly 30 or 40 trainings with our police department on constitutional policing and a variety of issues that we find, may be problematic to our public and how they police our streets. And they've been very receptive to that training, because ultimately what they understand is what we decide to prosecute is we are going to prosecute in a way that we believe is fair and just to our communities. And so I think we're all on board with that. And once you take that leadership, people will follow. But they need to know what direction you're headed in. And we headed in a slightly different, or we decided to move a little quicker in the direction of more justice and reform a lot sooner after the death of George Floyd.
Thank you, Aisha. Will?
Sure. I introduced, when I got sworn in, I wore that Agbada. Then 2 weeks later, I introduced my first bill, the first bill of this council, the Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act, on Martin Luther King's birthday, January 15th, 2019. And it called for independent investigations when police kill a resident. That's something that is now law in the state of Maryland. It was passed just this last session, saying that, we don't want police who are involved in the death to be investigating whether there was wrongdoing, right? Makes sense. It's one of the many, many reforms, and this was pre the murder of George Floyd. I think it's important to say the murder of George Floyd. And that ignited this conversation about what was already an unequal and unfair and unjust criminal justice system. There was just a story out this week, I think in the New York Times or Post, I can't remember, that said the federal government have actually been undercounting the number of police-involved deaths for Black Americans, by at least a third. And so even the data around it is not fully accurate. And but it has created a movement that's necessary, right? We all say freedom and justice for all when we said the Pledge of Allegiance and all of our founding documents. We know that's never been true for everyone, and there's no more pernicious example of it than I think in the criminal justice system, which has been used for hundreds of years as a tool of violence and suppression and unequal justice, particularly against Black people, but in other groups too, religious minorities, women, our gay and lesbian and transgender communities. And George Floyd's murder and that brave young woman who stood there for 9 minutes and recorded it has given us a window to accelerate, to Aisha's point, the work that many have been doing for a long time, but that woke up a lot of people. I compare it to, it was our, Selma moment for most Americans, that when they saw the water hoses and the dogs and they were like, this is happening in America. I think George Floyd was our generation's version of that. And what we've been trying to do, and we've passed several criminal justice reform bills that I've authored, a use of force bill, and we changed no-knock warrants as well, and a whole bunch of things that we're still working on. Traffic stops. You're 7 times more likely in Bethesda to be pulled over as a Black resident as a white resident. 7 times more likely, even though Bethesda is 80% white. 7 times more likely to be pulled over. 3 times more likely countywide. So we still have a lot of work in a system that is built on the legacy of slave patrols in the South, right? That is the origin of the police system. They have badges. If you go to the African American History Museum, it was the first police in the South were used to round up escaped enslaved individuals. That's just the history, right? And it has developed over time. And so I think for me, it's been a sense of urgency. How much can we get done as quickly as possible to ensure equal justice for everybody? And we're still in the middle of that.
Well, thank you so much for your servant leadership, Aisha and Will. The last question, 30 seconds. What does legacy look like for both of you? That's a tough one.
That is tough. Yeah, you go first.
I'm gonna give. She's been having to go first. So, legacy to me, I have 4 children, my wife and I hope that for them, and I'll name them Aaliyah, Addison, Ava, and William Isaiah, that we leave them a world and your children that's better than this. I think we all pass the baton, and I'm just trying to make as much progress and have an impact as much as I can to improve this world, to get more justice and equality for more people, and then pass it on.
Thank you.
So legacy for me is really, giving people a sense of hope. I recognize that in our justice system, whether it is someone who is a victim or someone who is a defendant, someone who's been incarcerated, that the biggest thing that they are often lacking is hope. Some people are hoping that the justice system works for them and brings them justice. And some people are hoping that behind those walls someone sees them, sees how they've changed, understands that redemption is real. And I just want to, and I know I'm going a little over 30 seconds because I think this is such important work. When I started down the path of looking at lengthy sentences and people who were disproportionately sentenced, it was not something that I think people thought, well, do prosecutors do that? Don't they usually defend sentences? The reality is my job is not to defend a sentence, it's to defend justice. And if someone has changed, if they have been rehabilitated, then there's no need for me to, not support them, wanting to reenter our society and our communities. And the first juvenile lifer that we helped to release, who now works for me, said to me that when he heard, they were listening to the news and they heard me speak about, my goal to look at sentences. They said it was the first time that they had hope that they would not die in prison. I mean, if you can imagine, and he's my age because he went in at 16, he's now in his 40s. He said it was the first time he had hope that he would not die in prison. And there's so many others like him who we've been able to help. And so my goal is to bring hope to everyone, hope to our communities that there will be better and brighter days, but also hope to those who have made a mistake that second chances are real.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing hope, and thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to just be a part of this group and to just, the depth that you shared in such a short time was amazing. So would you please help me? All right.